Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go over pivot tables and how to deal with them in VBA and how to turn on selected items in the pivot table using VBA. So before we get started, go to excelvbasequel.com. There's hours and hours of video to watch for free. Put in your email here and you can be emailed when a new free video is added. And contact me here and I'll answer your questions. Okay, so let's get started. So let's say we have data that looks like this. We have just on a sheet here, we have a column with a year in it. So these are going to be years. And then I have a fund, A, B, or C. So I have three funds, A, B, or C. And for every year, starting in 1996, I monitor their returns. So I have three fields, year, fund, and return. And my three funds, for every year, for 1997, I have three values. And then for 1998, I have three values. And it keeps going, 99, 2000, 2001, all the way up to 2006. And it could go on forever. I mean, it doesn't matter. So this sort of data, I mean, it's very useful to use a pivot table to analyze it. So what we could do is just insert a pivot table here. And I'm going to just click existing worksheets, and in the location I'll just put here F5, click OK. So what I could do here now is put my funds in the row label, and I could put my return in the value area, and then I can put my year across the top in the columns. Okay, so we could do something like this, and you can see here 1996 Fund A had a return of 9%, and then Fund B at 26%, and this totally matches what you see here for 1996. Okay, but the problem with pivot tables sometimes is that when you want to select items, so say the person only wanted to select 1 or 2 year, or let's say they only want to select 1998 to 2000 or something. And I guess this might be better if we, let me just go back here, and I take the year out of the columns label. And instead of this being a sum, let me change this to average. Okay, so now, or actually let me put year on top here. Okay, so now we have what we want. Someone comes in and they say, I want to look at the average return for my three funds from 98 to 2000. Well, there you go. But now what if they change their mind and go, I want to look at the average return from 98 to 2004. Well, then you have to go in here and click, 4 more boxes, and then click OK. So that's a bunch of clicking, right? It's a pain to do that. Then if they say again, I only want to look at 2000 to 2001. Well, then you have to go in, you have to click and click and just more clicking, and the data gets updated. But it is a real pain to go into this year pivot table field and update those bits of data. So let's write a macro, and let me just move this down a bit, that will take in a start year and take in an end year, and let me just move it down a little bit more, and let me just add a button to the worksheet, an ActiveX control. So go to developer, insert ActiveX control, and then I'm going to go here and I'm going to format this button to say update pivot, and I'm going to make the back color to yellow. So again, to get to this properties window and to change all that stuff, just right click on it in design mode and go to properties, and it'll pop up. Okay, so I just changed the caption property and the back color property, And now I have a button. So this is going to be useful because now I just need to enter, 1996 to 1998. And I'm going to be able to click a button. It's going to update that. And then if I want to change this to 2004, then I'm just going to be able to click a button and update that. Okay? So let's do that. So now we're in design mode. We can double click this. We come to the private sub command button 1.click. That means when I click on this, I can now write the code to perform what happens when it's clicked. So what we need to do now is declare a couple things. We need to declare a pivot table. So I'm going to do dim pt as pivot table. And notice pivot table is an object. If you don't know what objects are and things like that, it's good to watch the video on that. Next, we want to declare a pivot field. So dim pf as pivot field and dim pi as pivot item. So now let me go here and I'm going to go to pivot table options on the worksheet. I'm going to name this pivot table just test. I'm going to click OK. And I want to show you that now we can reference that pivot table by doing something like this. Set PT, and notice PT is the pivot table that I declared up here, equal to active sheet dot pivot tables, and then I put the name of the pivot table, which I just named the pivot table. Now I do set pf the field equal to pt dot pivot fields year. So what am I doing here? I'm gradually getting to the level where I can deal with this year field, and I just did that. So first I said set the pivot table that I want to deal with equal to this pivot table, the one called test. Then I said related to that pivot table, set the field, the pivot field, equal to the field called year, and that's what these two lines do. This sets the pivot table equal to the one called test, and this sets the pivot field equal to the pivot table. Here's PT again, pt.pivotfields year. Okay? And now, first thing we want to do is make sure that before we handle the years that we're dealing with, we want to make sure that all the years are turned on. So instead of, I guess first thing we want to do is turn on all the years. And to do that, you just do this with pt dot with pt.pivotfields year, and there's going to be an end with down here. We do a for each pi in pf dot pivot items next pi, and what this is doing is saying with that pivot field year, for every item in this field called year, that's what this loop is doing. For every item in that field, if the item is visible, actually if it's not visible, if it does not equal true, then make it true. So what we're doing is, if I only have, right now I only have 2000, 2001 selected. When I run this code, if I get out of this, when I run this, I have to set pi.visible is equal to true. So in this if statement it says if the item is not visible, so if pi visible does not equal true, then set it, then make it visible. So now I could run this. And let's see. If I run it, there you see that all is selected for the year, and that's because that code just went in and selected every item for the pivot table. So let me show you that again. If I only select 1996 and I press OK, and then I go in here again, you'll see it's only selected 1996. But then when I press the button, you saw that happen real fast. The code went in there and it selected every year. Okay, so we're starting out with that, where we can do that and select all the years. Now let's reference these cells, start year and end year. And let me just, to make it easy, I'm just going to go in here and call this start year and press. So if you want to declare a named range real easily, you just go click on the cell and type in the name of the range, the name you want, and press enter, and then go over here and do the same thing. Do end year and press enter. So now instead of saying range E3 or E4, it says start year. So I could reference those ranges now by going down here and I'm going to say turn on selected years. And this is pretty easy, same sort of thing. I'm just going to copy this for each loop. And for each PI in, I'm going to change it a little bit. Actually, should be able to stay the same. Now I can reference those fields. I could do if the PI is greater than or equal to range start year dot value and the PI. So this is saying if the pivot table item, in our case that item is a year, is less than or equal to range end year dot value. So these start year and end year is what I did up here. Okay. Then pi.visible is equal to true, else pi.visible, let me get rid of this box here, is equal to false. So we can now try this. We can go into the pivot table and only select 1996, and then if I run this, I see now that I have 1996 to 2004 selected in my pivot table. If I go in here and change this to, real quick, 2003 and press the button, really quick it changed it from 2003 to 2004. If I change this to 2004 to 2004, I only want 1 year, I press the button, it selects only 2004. So this code is very time saving, because you can see to go and get the data in the pivot table to be from, let's say, 1997 to 2004. Normally I would have to click on this and then go in here and click on 97, 98. Do that, it's a lot of clicking, 7 or 8 clicks, versus just going here, typing in 1997, clicking update pivot, and it's done, 1997 to 2004. Okay? Now, what if you pass in a year like 1950? Will it work? Yes, it works. What if you pass in a year like 2010, or 2020, that's not in the range? It works. So what if you leave this blank? Will it work? No, it won't work. And if you go to this, you'll see that you run into errors because it's trying to make a judgment on something that's blank, and it causes errors, right? So to get around that, you could do something. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get around that. You could make these cells read only, or you could do something. Let's try on error resume next. So what this code does, let's try this. What that code does is basically, I'll just type it. It says if there is an error, ignore it. That's all this line does. It says if there's an error, just ignore it. Just keep going. So I don't want to tell you to do that, but it's a way to get around someone leaving a blank in. Let's see if it works with 2 blanks. And sure enough, it does work with 2 blanks. The thing is this. Here's the thing. If you normally were to try to make a pivot table with no element selected, let me try to do this. You see that I can't press OK? So normally that would cause an error because you can't have a pivot table with no data selected. So normally that would cause an error, but because I wrote this line in here, on error resume next, whatever your pivot table started as, in our case it started with 2006, it just leaves it as 2006, because if I take out this line now, you'll see that when I try to make a pivot table have a blank start year and a blank end year, meaning I don't select anything, you just saw that when I do that, it causes a problem. It doesn't allow me to click OK, so it doesn't allow that. So I have to have something. So what happens here is that when I try to run it without the error handling, I run into an error because of exactly what we saw, that Excel doesn't like you to have pivot tables with no data in it. You have to select something. When you try to programmatically get around that, it still causes an error. But you can avoid that by doing this on error resume next. And what that'll do, if I now allow this to keep going if there's an error, what it's going to do is it's just going to say whatever year you start at, like if I select 1996 instead of 2006, it's just going to, if I press it, it's just going to let's see. So this is a good question. So why did it turn on 2006? Let's take a look. We can go in here and let's turn off the error handling. So we know there's an error, but let me show you. If I click the button, we didn't get an error yet because all it did is it turned on all the years, right? But now, because there's no date here, no date here, it's going to if I just run this, it throws the error. But notice that it throws the error on the last pivot item, meaning 2006. It throws an error on the last pivot item because for all the other ones, it made them invisible right here in this line of code. So in this if statement, it says, if the item is greater than or equal to the start year and the item is less than or equal to the end year, then make it true. But because we passed in a blank start year and a blank end year, everything falls into this false category. Everything is going to be made invisible. It's going to be visible set to false. And that happens at every year until 2006 comes along. And at that point, it's going to cause an error, right? But because we enable this to just keep going if there's an error, it's not going to show a message box and cause an error. It's just going to ignore it. And it's just going to say, well, when it gets to this point and it's 2006, it's going to say, I can't make 2006 visible set to false. I can't do that because that would be an error. It would cause problems. But because you told the computer just keep going, it says, okay, well, I can't do it. I can't make it invisible. So I'm just going to keep going and leave it where it's at. And that's why you always have 2006 if you have a blank year and a blank year here. So I don't know if that's insightful to you, but if you understand that, let's see it again. If I select 1997, 1998, with 100% probability, 2006 is going to show here, and there it is. Now, if you understand why 2006 always shows up by understanding what is going on in this for loop, and that everything is made invisible until the last year, which is 2006, and because you had this line of code, it ignores the error and just leaves it as it is with 2006 visible, then I would say your VBA programming skills are very good. If that's confusing to you, go replay some of the video or the conversation that I just had, and hopefully you'll understand. Once again, I'll try to summarize it. Because we have a blank and a blank, we're going to get an error, and it's going to set all the years equal to visible false, except for the last year, because I have this line of code here, on error, resume next. At the last year, it says I can't set it visible equal to false because it would be an error. And because you have this line here, it says, okay, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to leave it as 2006. Okay, so that was a long tangent on, this error handling of what happens when there's two blank cells. But I think it's very, very useful for you to understand that. And again, let's see how this works. If I click 2001, 2003, it works. It works very good. So it's very useful to have this type of code when you have a lot of pivot tables in your life, because you don't want to go in here and spend a minute selecting years. It's a waste of time. Also, could there be problems if 2003 is greater than 2001? Well, let's see. Yes, there are problems, because you can have a start year greater than an end year. So again, because we have this line of code selected, we wrote that line of code, on error, resume next. If that happens, it's just going to set all of them equal to false. Once again, if you're asking why did that happen, because the start year is there is no year that's going to be greater than the start year and less than the end year. Because you can't have that. You can't be greater than 2003 and less than 2001. That just can't happen. So that's a huge error. But we handled that sort of by doing this on error resume next. A better way to handle that would be to write a message box that says, you could, I guess we could do it real quick here. We could do it real quick here. It'll only take a couple seconds. If, let me just copy this. So here's how we could handle the problem that if they put in a start year greater than the end year. So if I do this now, if I write that little message box, it says error, start year is greater than end year, and then it just ends. Okay, so that's a way to get around that. So there's some error handling for you, and once again, that's what this code does. If you have a pivot table and you create it and you don't want to have spend ridiculous amounts of time clicking these boxes, then use code like this that will handle that for you. Okay, so that's all I wanted to show in this video. What I'm going to do, okay, let me just summarize the main points for this video. Main points are, you're dealing with pivot tables, so there are pivot table objects. If you don't know what objects are, go watch the video on the object model. Microsoft Excel is basically composed of objects. Pivot table is one of them. So you can declare variables to be that object. Like here, I declare PT as a pivot table and PF as a pivot field. So you're dealing with these objects, you have to declare them. So that's one idea. The next idea is use a for loop to loop through the pivot items and set them visible equal to false, visible equal to true. Initially, you turn all the years on, and then you just turn on the selected ones. And that's basically it. Pretty simple code. So once again, I'm going to post all of that code so you don't have to write it on excelvbasequel.com. You can watch a whole bunch of other videos and become an expert at Excel VBA. Enter your email here. I'll send you an email when we upload new free videos to watch, and contact me here and I'll answer your questions. Until next video, I'll talk to you later.